Today, like I said. All right, so I'm going to show you what I have created so far for this. So the first thing I said to do was just do some research. Just go out there and just try to find different images and stuff that you may want to use. Where did I put those images? Oh, reference. There we go. So I found these images here, which are just like old vintage cans. Okay, nice labels on here. So I like the shape of this one, and I kind of like the design of, I guess I didn't save that one. There's another design label that I thought was kind of neat. All right, so. Alright, so there is my can that I've built. Okay, now I want to show you quickly how I built that can. All the stuff that we've done in the intro class, all the stuff you've done to this point, you already know the steps. I just want to show you them so you can see them in a linear fashion. Okay, and you can see on here how it does look like metal. This is a metal texture. I did paint the metal part inside of Mari. This label here was done inside of Photoshop and then dropped on top of it. There's also a back to the can. Okay, and then there's just the regular can. Yes, ma'am.
So when you make the rusted one, do you go back into Photoshop and make the label look peeled in there?
Correct.
Okay.
So we would use Photoshop to do the peeling and stuff. We would also use Mari to do like the rust and whatever else. Sure. We may even come in and modify this a little bit. Like I may come and grab some of these points and just kind of, not like that, but kind of sag them down a little bit. Like that, kind of sag it down a little bit. Like this. Okay, just to give it, maybe it's a little dinged up, a little bit more realistic looking. Okay, but the first step is creating the clean version. Most of the time, if you work in commercial work, you're probably gonna be working with stuff like this, where it's like crystal clear, nice, clean kind of stuff. If you do the dirty stuff, that's usually like background props. If you get into gaming, it could be either or, depending on what kind of video game you're dealing with. All right. So my first step in this was creating that base shape. So I started off with just a cube, and I'm going with, like I said, this kind of shape here. Now you can't see the whole thing. The experience tells us how these things would be created, like you've seen them before. So I'm just going to create the basic outline of this shape. Now depending on what you're starting with, you may want to start with a different shape. If I'm doing one of these cans, I would most likely start with a cylinder. That's the easiest way to start off those. Oopsie, where'd you go? There you go. All right, so now I have this. What I want to do is I want to add some divisions in here to start rounding this off. So I'm going to go to my edges. I'm going to grab all my edges going across like this. And then I'm going to go and put a bevel on it. Okay, I'll add a couple segments like 3. Take my fraction down a smidge. Maybe 0.3. There we go. 0.3 looks good. Okay, and then I can come in and start to add this stuff. Now you can't overlook these kinds of things. That's what's going to help kind of sell this item as being a realistic item, is having these kind of like little lip areas. Okay, now underneath, you can't see it in the picture, but underneath it kind of like goes inward. Okay, so I'll have to create that also. So a quick way I can do this is just grabbing this face and then extruding it. And let's say I just went down like this. Okay, then I can grab this one and extrude that and pull it out. Okay, so I just created that little lip right there. All right, extruded it, pulled it down, grabbed the lip all the way around it, and extruded that outward. Do the same thing on the top so you can see it again. Click the face, extrude, pull it up a little bit. I'm just grabbing the one arrow just to pull it straight up. I'm going to click on this, hold shift, double click that one, extrude again, pull that out. Okay, then I'm going to grab this here and extrude it, and I'm going to take the thickness, yes, the thickness down. Nope, not thickness, the offset down. There we go. Because I want to bring this in a little bit to have a little bit of inset. So I may have to type it in 0.1, that looks good. And then I will pull it down a little bit, extrude it again, pull it down a little bit. Okay, so I'm imagining that's kind of what that would look like up there. Maybe not so deep, maybe like that. Okay, I'm going to do something similar on the bottom. I'm going to extrude, take the offset down to like that, extrude again, and this time I'm just going to scale it and just kind of pull it up a little bit. Okay. Now, ideally, this thing would be smoothed out. So right now, you can see how blocky it is, especially on these edges. Something we have to pay attention to, because in that final render, that will come across. If we have this thing looking blocky, it's going to look blocky in the final render. So we always have to keep that in mind, that we want to keep it nice and smooth. So when I click on this and hit 3, remember it takes us into that smooth preview mode, and then we can kind of look at it and see what it's looking like. So the second I do that, I kind of lose a bit of my softness, or a bit of my edge here. You can see it now looks like there's a bump there as opposed to having an actual ridge. So then what I'm going to do is grab the edge, double click, shift, double click, shift, double click. Do the same thing at the top. Come on, there we go. Anywhere it's super hard around the edge, I'm going to shift, double click it to grab all the way around the edges. Okay, there I'll do too, but I have to do that after. So I'm going to go to bevel the edge. I'm going to take the segments to, let's say, 2. Maybe 1 should be fine. All right, we'll see. And then I'll go back to object mode and hit 3. Okay. So now this looks nice like that. This looks nice like that. All right. If I needed to, if I wanted to, I could add an edge loop here and just kind of scale that out some. But I don't think it's really necessary, so I won't do that.
Hey, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
No, by using that quick preview mode, it's not really modeled that way, but will it render that way?
It would render that way in Mental Ray. Okay. But eventually what's going to happen is we're going to have to add extra divisions anyway before we do any sub-D stuff. Otherwise, it's going to look wonky. So this area here looks really weird because of how this is going from having divisions to no divisions. So if I go to Mesh, Edit Mesh, and I go to Poke, you can see it pokes the face. And then I can grab this edge here all the way around. I can bevel it, maybe 0.25, sure. There we go. Okay, now I think I want to flatten this out a little bit too. Like I think this edge here could use a bevel. There we go. And then this down here, I think I should poke that face also. Edit Mesh Poke. And then I'm going to grab this edge and add a bevel. Alright, so now that looks nice like that. Nice like that. Okay. At any point I can tweak this. So if I'm not happy with the height of it, I'm not happy with the width, I'm not happy with anything that's turned out, I can go ahead and adjust it. Now you want to avoid at this point scaling it, because if you do it too far, look at the size of this compared to the size of that. You have to be on the lookout for this kind of stuff because it'll just cause you issues later that you can't undo, and you basically have to go back and redo some of your stuff. If I need to tweak that, I'm going to go to my vertices, go to my top view so I can see it, and I can just grab all of these and just move it. And by doing that, I'm not scaling anything, I'm just moving that side over. Okay? And then the center point, I can just move that to kind of like, that's about center. Okay? And if I hit 3, it looks nice and smooth, whatever. I don't need it like that, so I'm just going to undo it. Alright. So now we have this. Now if we look at the top of this, you'll see there's also like this round area. Obviously that should also be included in that so that I have some sort of lid on top of it. So on my other one, I actually modeled it into it, just to keep things simpler. I'm just going to grab a cylinder and just put the cylinder on here. Okay, and I'm going to make this look like that cap. So I'm going to go to Edges. I'll put in a bevel. I'm going to go to Edge Loop. And I'm just going to scale this one down. And then I'm going to grab this one and just scoot it. Okay, so now it kind of looks like that's a cap. I'm going to add a couple bevels in here too, just to kind of hold some of these shapes. That's what bevels are for. Anytime you need a bevel, it rounds the corner, but it also holds that shape so that we don't lose it whenever we smooth it. It just doesn't go away. So now I hit 3. You can see we still have that little lip right there. Okay. Now on the bottom, it might be hard to see. On the bottom, this is like caving in. I'm just going to go and delete this face. And I can also move this up so that we're not wasting our space there. There we go. Alright. So now I have that there and I have this here. I should probably make this a little bit bigger. Because if this is a cap, that makes it a weird cap. So I'm just going to go to Vertices, grab that, pull this down. There we go. That feels like a more appropriate cap. Alright, so as far as modeling goes, the modeling part is done. Okay. The next thing I have to look at is, as I'm smoothing this, watch the edges as I go from 1 to 3. Do you see how far they're moving? We can't have them move that far, because that will cause us issues later on when we get to the texturing part, where our texture will look nice when it's rough, then we'll hit 3 to smooth it, and it'll squish it in, and then it'll stretch the textures on the side. Okay. So what I need to do is I need to add some extra divisions in here. So I'm going to go to Mesh. Let me save all this stuff first. I'm going to throw it on a layer. There we go. I'm going to duplicate it. Take the copy off of that layer. Okay, so I basically have 2. There's 1, and then there's 1 in the layer. And I'm going to take this. I'm actually going to smooth it. So I go to Mesh Smooth. And now I actually put extra divisions in there. So now when I go from 1 to 3, do you see how very little it moves? Okay, so that is more acceptable. We shouldn't get much stretching, if anything. It's just part of the deal that we would get stretching anyway. Now I may not even need to hit 3 to actually smooth it out, because this looks like it's already pretty smooth. Okay, unless I'm zoomed in right here where I could see these things. If I'm back here, I'm probably not going to notice it. Okay, so we may not even need to hit 3 to smooth it out. And the same thing here. This smooths out quite a bit, so I'll just go to Mesh, say Smooth. Cool. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out the UVs for this. Okay, so last time when we did that, we downloaded the image, brought it in. Yes, sir.
Could we essentially do what you just smoothed it permanently, the cap? I noticed. Could you have just smoothed the
just the bottom
can itself?
What do you mean, like this?
When you were talking about you didn't want it to be stretched when you smooth it, so you wanted it to be closer together. Like, could you have just smoothed the can completely?
I did.
Okay, and then just keep it permanently like that.
Right. Yeah. So the smooth is on there. What I don't want to do is have too many divisions on here. Like if I set this to 3, that might be a nightmare to have to go through.
You don't want too many. Okay.
Right. Like having those extra, those is not going to be a big deal. But if we went to 3, that definitely would be.
All right.
Okay. So last time we downloaded that image, so I'm going to go and grab that same image. So we had that in my source images for primers. There he is. So I'm just going to copy that and put it into my source images for this one. So I'm going to assign that surface shader. File, folder, UV layout. Okay. And now here's why it's important to use something like this. If we're putting a label on here, we need to know that number 1, the label is facing up and down, and then number 2, it's not rotated backwards, right? So even though this might be up and down, let's say that I you know, looking at the UVs, which are really jacked up in here. You know, these are still square, but now that's upside down. So when I go into Photoshop and I draw my label, I jump back to Maya, now my label's upside down and I have to tweak it. It's not a huge deal, but I don't want to chance anything. So we just want to be aware of that. Okay. So now this looks like it's going to be very difficult to lay out, but it really isn't. Okay, if we just break it up into pieces. Thinking about the different shapes and directions this thing is facing. Also thinking about the different pieces that we could separate. Watch what I'm going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's do the cap. That'll be like the easiest part. So I'm going to go to the cap here, and looking at the cap, I basically have faces that are facing cylindrical shape, and then if I look at the top, I have faces that are facing straight up and down. So I can break that into two: cylindrical mapping, planar mapping. That's all I have to do there. So I'm going to go to my face mode, and I'm going to grab these faces. I went inside just so it was easier to grab those. And I'm going to use Shift greater than. You can also go to Select Grow right here if you want to go up there. I'm going to use Shift greater than. And I'm going to select any of the faces that are facing mostly up. So maybe one more, like that. Okay. Then I'm going to go to my UVs. Here we go. I'm going to say Planar Mapping option box. I'm going to say keep the image height width ratio. I'm going to say set it from the Y direction and then project. And what you're going to see is that we get perfect squares and we get this thing laid out perfectly. So I'm going to go to my UV editor. I'm going to scoot him off the screen. I don't like to have him on top of the other one while I'm working. And then we'll move on to the other side. Now when I go and grab the other side, here's just a quick way to select the other side. I go to faces here and grab this. Oops, not that. Go grab faces here, and now I have everything else. Alright, so now I can go to cylindrical mapping. No options here. That one, but I never even worry about it. And we project. Now this has a half a cylinder right here. You can see where this red dot is and where this red dot is. So I'm going to bring the red dots together. So now they're closed. Okay. Then they're stretched out. So I'm going to grab the green and pull the green up until these are square. Okay. Now I may need to adjust this so I can see it. Alright, that looks pretty square right there. Alright. So now on here, I have this and I have that. The end goal is that the divisions for both, the sizing of both, is pretty similar to what we would see in the real world. So if this is the cap, that's the bottom, they should be a lot closer. Okay, especially if we look at the faces here. Look how many squares fit on this and how few squares fit on this. Okay. So I need to scale this guy down until he fits. So I'm going to right click and go to shell. I'm going to scale him down until he approximately fits. And you can use this as kind of like a guide, like that. You know, maybe just there you go. That one's probably a better one to look at. Okay, so I'm just using that shape right there just to kind of eyeball how big this is. Alright, so it's pretty close. Alright, so now the cap's done. I have these two pieces. I'm going to keep them off the side for now. Eventually we'll consolidate and get them all together. Okay, so I did a cylindrical mapping and I did a planar mapping. That's all that needs to happen for those. Yes, ma'am.
Since you're not like putting an image on this, why do you need to UV layout it?
I'm putting that metal texture on there.
Okay.
That's my image, okay? And then when I put the rust, same thing.
Okay.
All right, anything you're going to put an image on, not a flat color, has to have that. Okay. So now we'll do the can. This one's going to be a bit trickier, but it's still definitely manageable. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to planar map this. I'm just going to shoot it in the Z direction, project it. That side looks great, but then like we showed before, we get this stretching and whatever else, okay? So I planar mapped this just so I have everything in one. So you remember the mess that was there a few seconds ago? Well, now there's no mess. It's just all consolidated on top of the one. So now I'm going to go and cut this. So I'm going to go to my edge, and I'm just going to double click it about there. Nope, one more over. There we go. I wanted to get it to go all the way to this center line. Now I'll do the same thing here. Shift, double click that one so it goes all the way around that side, hopefully all the way down here, hopefully all the way to the center. Okay? So what this is going to do is it's going to cut this into separate pieces. So I'm going to go back to my UV editor and say polygons cut. And that separates those two pieces. Then I'm going to go ahead and cut this in other spots. So I'm going to cut it right here. Okay, so this is like right underneath the lip of the area. I'm going to cut it right there. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Okay, now I'm not going right to this one, because if I did go right to that, come on, right to this one, when it smooths, that edge is going to shift, and I don't want that edge to shift. So I'm giving myself just a little bit of room. And the bottom I'm not too concerned about because it's the bottom, but just good. Okay. So now I've cut this thing up. So now I'm going to right click and go to shell, grab it all, and go to polygons unfold. Okay. So now all the pieces, are laid out. Now what I want to do is analyze what the pieces are looking like and try to get this as nice as I can. So some of these areas like this and this, you can see aren't looking very nice. If we look at where they're at down here in the UV editor, they're super tiny. In our image, or in our 3D world, they're actually pretty big. And the same thing here, these are probably the bottom. Yep, those are the bottom pieces. Okay, so let's say I take these two bottom pieces, which are for the most part pretty straight up and down, and I just did a planar map on it and said go to Y. So now those are nice. Okay, let me grab the top pieces. I'll do a planar map on those. Oops, not from there. Planar map. There we go. And now the top looks nice. Okay. Then we have this piece and this piece. Those ones we'll have to see. Sometimes it helps to scale it up just so you can see if they are square. Click off of it so I can see it. Yeah, not really. You can see they're kind of like wobbly a little bit. If I rotate them, they still look like they're kind of wobbly. Okay, so some things that'll help is maybe going through the edge here and just adding an extra cut. Sometimes that'll help too. So I'm kind of going at where it looks like it's transitioning and cutting the edges. Okay, and then what are these two pieces here? All right, and that's just the bottom ones just like that. So I'll make those bigger so I can see them. And what's weird is just looking at how Maya's figuring out the bottom should look compared to the top, when realistically they're pretty close to the same kind of shape. And these ones look like they are, if I scale it up big enough. There we go. They look like they are pretty uniform already. Yeah, so I'm not even concerned with those two. Make sure they're about the same size. There we go, there we go. Okay. So now let's look at this other one. So with this, I'm going to take this side here, I'm going to take this side here, and just get them out of the way. Okay. I'm going to merge these two pieces together. They don't need to be a separate piece, they can just be one big piece, and that should work out good. So I'm going to go to edge mode, and if I come close to this edge, as I highlight these, you can see how it's highlighting the other side, because those are a joined object. Okay, in the real world, or in the 3D world, they're actually connected. So I'm just grabbing these edges that are matching, and I'm going to join them together.
You grab one that doesn't match on the other side.
These don't matter, okay?
No,
These,
next to it.
which one? This?
Up. Right there.
Here?
Left.
That? Yeah. These ones are on the inside, so these actually don't matter. They're not cut, okay? What we're looking at here is where we've cut them in the real world, or in the 3D world. That's where we've cut it, okay? So that's basically an edge seam. So I'm going to merge these together by going to move and sew. That puts them together, okay? So think of a piece of fabric being separated. That's what this is. So I'm going to unfold this again. There we go. And I think I need another edge off of here. I think this top edge is just causing it to not look very good. So let me just cut that one, and I'll go to this one, and cut that one off. Nope, didn't really do anything.
Are you not concerned with the fact that the sides are more rectangular?
I am. I'm surprised it's not fixing those. That's what I was hoping it would do. If I make this whole thing bigger, it's easier to see, but yes, they're definitely should be square and they're not. Okay, and this just happens sometimes where the geometry or whatever it is that's causing it is just not playing nice. And make sure I'm not in smooth mode. Sometimes that's the case. It's not the case. So I'm going to go into here, and I'm just going to cut it where I said I wasn't going to cut it before, and see if that helps fix it. Well, it definitely helps straighten it out. See how I cut it? And now this is perfectly straight, going straight around. I'm going to lay it out a little bit different. I'm going to go to UV. I'm going to go to automatic mapping. Oops, wrong one. Automatic mapping. There we go. It will. Stretch to square. None. So I'm just setting this to scale mode to none, and then automatic. I'll probably still have to adjust it anyway. Yeah. So these come in not being square, so I'm just going to square these up, square these up. And then what that should give me is a square texture. So if I come in here, just so we can see it, you can see that that is pretty square going all the way around now. Okay? So sometimes on the one that I showed originally, unfold worked perfectly. I was able to unfold it, it laid everything out pretty straight, and everything was cool. This one, for whatever reason, doesn't want to do that. So in here, it's not working the way I wanted it to, so I just had to adjust it. And I'm going to do that again. There we go. I'm just going to grab those other pieces too. And then we'll do automatic mapping, and then just resizing it. And you'll see as I start to scale it, it's adjusting it in here as well. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I have all these pieces. Come on, scoot out. Scoot out. There we go. And I can go to my edges and now just merge them back together. So grab these, move and sew, move and sew. Grab these, move and sew that. Grab these, move and sew that. Okay.
The UV editor had like a shelf of its own.
Yes, that'd be nice. I mean, it has these, and move and sew is up here,
Yeah, it's just like,
but it's hard to see what it is.
yeah, there's so many of them.
All right, then we're left with these couple pieces here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge these back in with the other shapes. Okay, so I'm going to just go to Edge, grab everything here, and then cut it. And then I'm going to deselect it from this, move and sew them back together. Whoa, that's a mess.
That's great.
And then we'll just grab these shapes again, shells. There we go. And then we will unfold it. There we go. Now this is the top. It put everything back together. So I just need to go through and cut these edges here. So I'll grab those edges. I'll go to the other side, shift, grab those edges, cut the edges. You really have to think of it like a piece of cloth. I mean, it's the easiest way to do it. If you're making a shirt or something, you gotta unfold these things. I'm gonna sew these together. I'm gonna grab these, sew those together. Oops. I grabbed too many edges here and it started merging to other stuff. Nope. There we go. Alright, so let's try unfold again. So grab the two shells, grab the polygons, grab the unfold. There we go. Okay, and then I can go in and maybe cut this here and there. And every shape's going to be different. So the more complex your shape is, the more stuff you're going to have to do to it to get it to line up right. So there we go. Now these are lined up pretty good. If I scaled them huge, you can see that these are pretty much square shapes. There's a little bit of distortion right on the end, but that's not going to be a huge deal. It's going to be so minor. Okay. So now we have these two shapes. We have these arm shapes here. I thought I had some more shapes. Where's the other ones? There they are. And then these shapes. And just for the sizing of this, I'm going to cut these two. If I have any shapes that are like really long, like these ones are, it's just going to throw off the rest of the scene. So by cutting those, it should allow this to lay straighter. And I didn't cut it all the way through. Let's try that again. Edge. There we go. Yep. So let's unfold that again, cut the UV edges, and unfold again. So you'll see I'm just using the same menu things. I'm cutting things, sewing things, and unfolding things until I get some nice shapes in here that help lay out the texture nice and evenly on this. Okay. Now the next step in this is all of these have to be essentially the same size. I can't have these ones being huge and then these ones being tiny. They all have to be roughly the same size. So I know that these are all kind of grouped in the same size and these are all kind of grouped in the same size. So if I start with those, it'll be easier. So I'm just going to scale these either up or down until their scale matches the scale of these ones. Okay, so I'm going to have to scale it up to make them smaller. Kind of like that. There we go. So you can see that these two are pretty much the same size, so that's good. So these are all sized. Now I'm going to take this piece, which is my base, and I'm going to scale this up until they're roughly the same size. Now they're going outside that box, that's fine. Right now I'm just concerned with getting the scale correct. So that looks like it's pretty close to that size, so I'll just set that down. And then these two are already set up because those are the ones I was using to line everything up. Okay, so now I have all of these pieces here. Now what I want to do is use this and those kind of all together. So if I grab both of these, see how they show up in the UV editor? Now I can organize all of these into a nice little square pattern. So if I just set this like here, squish this down a little bit, put that there, oops. Grab these, push that down a little bit, grab these, push that down a little bit, cool. Now I can grab everything and just scale it and make sure that it fits in that top square. If I bring this into Mari and I try to paint anything in here and it's not inside that top box, then it won't paint. Okay, it'll actually give me some weird errors inside there.
Do we have to do the texture in Mari?
You will do part of the texture in Mari. So if I were to throw that metal on here now, everywhere there's a seam, there would be a different color. Like there would be an obvious seam right there. So we want to go into Mari and paint out all of those seams. Okay. Then when we do the rust, obviously the same thing. I may want to paint the rust from here dripping down. And so I need to paint that inside Mari too.
Well, you're putting a label on it too, right?
Right, that'll be done in Photoshop.
Okay.
Okay. Now the reason that that'll work in Photoshop is because we have one solid face, or one solid object that we're applying that to.
Are you doing are you texturing the entire can in metal and then putting a label texture over that, or are
Correct.
you just texturing the top two portions that are going to show in metal and then putting a label texture?
I'm putting metal over the entire thing,
Okay.
and then putting the label on top of it. So if this was a can from back here, in this case it goes all the way around. So that's just like spray painted on, maybe sticky, whatever. This is probably a piece of paper. But some of these, like, well, none that I'm seeing in here, some of them would just have like basically a label on the front and a label on the back.
Okay.
And then the sides would be metal. Okay. Alright, so now everything is pretty uniform. The top looks like it's a little bit too big, just for fun. Oops. Yeah, that was right. Okay. Alright. So now I have everything in one UV. That's what I want. That's your end goal after you're done modeling it. You're done laying out the UVs. All the squares are pretty much uniform, and they're all fitting within one square. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is go to polygons and do a UV snapshot. And I'm going to call this whatever I want to call it. Out can UV. I'm going to size it to 4096 by 4096. I'm going to hit okie dokie. And then I'm going to open up Photoshop. Okay. Now what that's done is it's created a picture that looks exactly like our UV editor, so I can literally go in there and draw whatever I want, and it'll plop it right onto that spot. Okay. So if I wanted on the top of the cap here, if I wanted to put my initials, I could put an S right here in Photoshop, save it, and when I bring that texture on, that S will line up perfectly with where the cap is. And just to be safe, I should probably save this. I haven't saved anything. Living on the wild side. Come on.
No one does.
No one do's. I'll get a tattoo that says that.
Including that tattoo.
Put it on your knuckles.
Alright, 2520, work, product modeling. Okay, this went inside my images, and here's my out can UV. Now I have to make sure that in Maya I specified the correct size, 4096 by 4096. If, and this happens, you don't specify it, you get a super tiny file. So what happens is you build your whole texture with a super tiny file, it looks horrible, and then you apply it and it looks like junk, and then the only way to fix it is to go back, re-export it, bring it back into Photoshop, remake your entire label. Okay? So the indicator for you is right here. If I'm at 12.5% and I can barely see anything, that means I'm pretty far zoomed out. And that means that that file is pretty big. Okay? So I'm going to scoot my layers over here so you can see this, and I'm just going to double click over next to the layer. I have UVs here. I can't see them because they're so tiny. But if I go and add a stroke to this, and I change this to an outside stroke, you can kind of see it. And then as I add this a little bit higher and higher, there we go, now we can actually see it. Okay? So that's our UVs. This down here, that's your can. That up there is your cap. This right here is the ring around the cap, and then we can see where the top and the bottom are. We can see where all these little ridges are. For the most part, I'm not touching anything in here except for this area and this area. Okay? So I'm going to build a label just really quick. I'm just going to create a shape here. I'm going to pick a color, and I'm going to fill it with that color. I want to see my UV still, so I'm just going to drop this underneath. Now I can see that. Okay. Now I don't know where exactly my label is going to be, but I can kind of guess. If I look at the shapes, there's two big right here, and then two thinner ones on the outer sides of that. I'm assuming that's where my label is. I don't know if it is. I can go into here and I can verify two big ones and then these two strips. So I'm assuming that's where my label is. Okay. Now I don't know which one's the front or which one's the back. That information might be kind of helpful. So I'm going to go back to Maya. I'm going to right click and go to face. I'm going to click here. This is the front of my can, let's say. So it's on the right. So when I jump back to Photoshop, this area is the front of my label. So I'm going to go to my text tool and say cool label. I'm going to make it bigger, give this a different color. I'm going to play with some of my other features here. Cool label.
Don't get mad when I turn that in.
There we go. And I hate when Photoshop does that, so let's fix that. And that's not Photoshop, that's just me not doing it right. Alright, so cool label. Let's close that. And then we can just, whatever we would design for this. So anytime you're designing a label, you want to go and look at reference. There we go. So a lot of these are pretty simple. Like this Jet Ease one is super simple. It's Jet Ease spray finishes, a bunch of text, and then a little simple graphic on the side. Okay. Something like this, again, super simple. It's got some shapes in it. It's got some words in it. It's got this, which I think is pretty awesome. Suggested retail price $2.95. They don't do that anymore. I think Munchos is the only thing that has the price right on the bag.
There's also Arizona cans.
Do they? Okay. And then this one, again, it's pretty simple. So look at labels, find a design that's going to work. Something like this. Let me turn my UVs off so you can see it. That simple doesn't work. It doesn't look like a label. There's no way you'd walk into a store and see this item there. Okay?
I think it looks like a cool label.
Totally buy that cool label.
Let's put a price on it then. So $6.99.
Too rich for my blood.
Well, you don't know what it is, so it could be anything.
I can get it.
I would
Now
say
when I
the
can
cool
get
label.
3 years worth of ramen for $2.
Like 10.
That's right.
I'll entice you more with to buy this. Cancel my text. Scoot this underneath. Actually, we'll make a new one. Beer. See, it's cool label beer, so you gotta buy it now.
It's a weird can.
It is a weird can.
Yeah, right?
Is this beer?
This is beer or paint thinner. I'm not sure which one.
Living life on the edge.
Well, the bottle makes me think of
They'll
the first
pro-
one you
they'll
made
both
made me
probably
think
get
of
you drunk.
I don't know what they're called, but yes, thank you, canteens. Made me think of a beer canteen, or like a liquor canteen, whatever the heck you want to call it.
The flask, I think.
That'll work.
You could fill your tank with beer. You probably.
There you go. That's cool. Not there.
You have to use orange with that blue.
I have to now.
That is the
Jeez,
purple
Sean.
last semester.
Oh my god.
I thought you knew your color wheel.
Here's how I pick the color. I pick that color and then I go to.
Purple and red together.
That matches.
Purple or
It
red?
did not.
This
Not
does.
to
I'm saying this
You get
does.
purple from red, of course. That looks great,
There you
Sean.
go. Cool. All right.
What kind of grade would that be?
Would not be a good grade.
Where do you?
This is a demo lecture or demo label. That's what that is. All right. So I'm going to save it into my source images folder as an if beer label, whatever you're going to call it, as a Maya. And then when we go back to Maya and we grab everything and we assign a new Mila to it. Mila. Tan. File, folder, beer. Woo! See how it fits, like right where we want it to fit. That's where we told it to fit, is right in that spot. Okay? So anything we want to add to this, we can add right to that exact spot inside of here. Notice I turned off my UVs. This is actually off a little bit too. Tell me that. Where's layer 2? What's that? Nothing.
So do you have to, or the stroke shows up?
What was that? I have to have this with a stroke so I can see it.
Right, but if you leave the stroke on and save it, it shows up in my...
Right, it would show up. So you actually have like a grid. Now in some cases you may want that, not for this, but for some you may want to show like the actual wireframe on your mesh, which could be a cool effect. So same thing for the back. If I added some text here, and then we save it as an if image.
That was a lot of information about beer.
It is. There's a lot of information you need to know about it. Oops.
There it is and there isn't.
And then all we have to do is delete our history so we don't have all this history here. There we go. And then just reload.
You can finish it. Yeah.
And there it is. Now I didn't line it up right, obviously, because it's not centered. So we'll just shrink that down. Line that up. Good. Turn that off. Now I have to make sure I keep going back to that same folder. Reload. There you go. Alright, so there's my text. Now this is what I was talking about before. The text looks like it's pretty clear. But using this filter type and setting that off will make it a bit crisper. Okay? So if you have this up too high, your text will actually look fuzzy, just so you can see, like sometimes it'll actually look like, come on. Well, it would look horrible. Okay, so we turn that off. Now it looks a little bit crisper and clearer. Sir.
You save the file as an if, not an diff.
Right, as an if. Ifs render better inside a mental ray, so that's what we want to use. Now, if you go from here into something like Keyshot or something like VRED, ifs may not be used. You may have to save it as something else. No big deal, because we have the file. Okay. We also want to save this stuff as can too as a PSD, so we can always come back and edit it. You make a spelling error, happens all the time. You want to choose different colors, you want to do whatever. Make sure you're saving your PSDs. There we go. So we'll pretend that that label is good for now.
Do ifs have layers or no?
Was that?
Ifs have layers?
No, the PSDs do. So I saved the PSD separate. So here is my can2 PSD. The if does not have any layers.
Oh.
All right. So then that's step 1, making this label. Step 2 is designing the rest of the can, because obviously the rest of this is just a plain gray. Whatever color our background was inside of Photoshop, it just drops that color on for the rest of it. So then the other part of this would come from Mari. Okay. And with this, come on. I need to export this as an OBJ, which we've done before. Export selection. Can export OBJ. That's the only way we can get from Maya into Mari. Well, not the only way, but the only way we're going to do it. And then we'll wait for Mari to open somewhere in here. It's still waiting. While I'm waiting, I'm going to grab my metal texture, which is right here. Okay. Now this is going to be a bit simpler than we'll eventually get into. All we're going to do is drop the metal onto it, paint the metal, and then just fix up any areas that look like there's a seam. That's all we're doing with this. Okay. I'll show, just so you can see it, how we can add some different colors. Maybe the cap should be a different color. I do want to add some ridges. Like I downloaded this thing, which is like it's a door. And what I wanted to do was add this door to the cap so it looks like the cap has ridges so we could twist it, as opposed to adding a bunch of geometry to give it the ridges. There you are. What?
Take the easy way out.
You know what they say in Rocky, there's no easy way out. Soundtrack. While we're waiting for that, I'm just going to jump to Photoshop. So this is, just so we can see it too, this is the cap, or this is the sides of the cap. So I could just take this image here, and drop it, I'll leave it there I guess, and rotate it.
Wouldn't it be exactly the same if you just left the stroke on it?
No, because then it would go horizontally too. I don't want it to go horizontal. Alright, so I can take this and then I'll just duplicate it. Like that. There we go. So now when I brought that in, it would have that look to it. Is Mari going to open now? Good. Okay. So, same thing we did last class. I'm going to load my geometry. That one in the back should be working today. 2520, work, product models, skeins, can export. Same size image, 4096. Most of our texture is going to be 4096. The root path, I can ignore this for now. I'm not doing anything incredibly complex, so I'm only going to be in it for like 2 seconds. So then Mari should open up our texture, or our geometry, drop the color in there, and then we can paint it right on. While I'm waiting. Here's the cap. So if I want to give the cap a color too, highlight this area, add a new layer, pick a color. There we go. So now the cap would have that kind of coloration to it. Okay. Now when we get back into Mari, we paint that. Oh, you. All right. And that close. All right, so your job, model your product. Keep in mind the end quality. Keep in mind we want something that's nice and crisp and clean at the end. We want to look like an actual product, so you have to take the time to actually model it in. You don't need to get super fine detail. Like I said, on here, I just painted in the little marks. You don't need those marks to be actually modeled into there and add a whole bunch of extra geometry and divisions to your surface. That would just be a waste, especially because we're going to be kind of like back here with this. Okay, so model it, then lay out the UVs, then start the texturing process. Okay, the more complex the model, the more complex the UVs, the longer that's going to take. Okie dokie.